Treasury.
Thank you. And I will start with first items. It's around arm's length bodies, grants and subsidies. We did have questions before. We followed up with the letter. We're in the middle of our review. So it's actually to touch base that and to clarify some areas and to plans for the future. So in Synergy Oversight, Arm's Length Bodies Recommendation 2 stated that update the public finance manual to require structured reviews of all arm's length bodies comprising states-owned entities, states-established delivery entities, and state-established independent bodies and office holders on a periodic basis, such as every 5 years. This was agreed in principle. Can you advise the PAC where you believe that this spirit of the recommendation is currently being met, we understood, and if I understood correct, there is no structured reviews appear to be scheduled.
Were you quoting directly there from the Public Finance Manual update? Was it a recommendation? It was a recommendation.
Recommendation number 2,
from the recommendation. So, in terms of the Public Finance Manual update, I think as we discussed last time around, the responsibilities with the accountable officer for those decisions. They take a risk-based view of that. There's recommendations in the PFM manual about them satisfying themselves that they meet the required standards, that they have the information to do so, and that they should consider structured reviews either on a periodic or ad hoc basis. I wasn't clear that it specified 5 years in the manual, but someone can correct me on that. But have I got that right, you said?
Yeah, the manual.
So it's not specified. So at the moment, the guidance in the manual is as you see it. There are currently, to the best of my knowledge, no structure reviews planned by any of the accountable officers. I think in part that may be slightly superseded by the performance objective which the Chief Minister and COM have given me for the fourth quarter, which I think you've seen and has been shared with you. But at the moment, none are planned.
Okay, now I need a bit more clarity, because we did have 3 of the chief officers 2 weeks ago. We did have chief officer for the economy, we had the chief officer for social security and housing, chief officer for cabinet office. And we did ask them the same question as about planned review and their duties, because we followed up your answer. And their answers were different actually between 3 of them. So I think that, and one, like for example, chief officer for cabinet office was very clear that what reviews he's undertaking and
what reviews, yes.
Yeah. So he is very clear. But what I would like to check, we have a chief officer for economy, and I will read out from the transcript. The chief executive. So when we ask about looking into the arm's length bodies, and there are lots of delivery arm's length organizations under remit of the economy. It's like Jersey Business, all that,
At least 7 in the
and
economy,
exactly. And we ask, what are your plans? Are you going to do the structural review? Are they still reaching objectives? Follow your response to PAC. This is within the chief officer remit. And what we've been told, the chief executive is looking across the whole government, because we're talking about, so there are many other bodies sit outside the department. So basically the answer was, now it's not me, it's the chief executive. So I would like to understand, as a chief executive, are you all taking any reviews? And if yes, what type of the reviews for the arm's length organizations and bodies?
So, in a business as usual state, it's as I described the last time I was here. If you look at the Public Finances Manual in the particular area you mentioned, obviously there are many obligations on them, but that they should consider carrying out structure reviews, blah, 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 as we mentioned. That is the prerogative of the accountable executive. If they feel it's needed to discharge their responsibilities under the Public Finance Manual, The typical triggers for that I can see looking back, because there's only been 3 structured reviews in my time, which I think you must have heard about last week, is sometimes it's driven by a ministerial priority, can be a trigger. Sometimes it's a policy change that's the trigger. Could be the CSP, if there's a specific delivery issue within that. Or the trigger event could be a performance issue of some shape or form in the arm's length organisation itself, that then triggers the AO to believe that they need to do something more structured. Outside of that, of course, they have many ways in which they manage that relationship and influence it, MOUs and various other things. Most of that is convening, placing obligations inside their departmental business plans on that arm's length body. So that's BAU. I can only imagine that that particular officer in giving evidence was referring to the broader review that forms part of my performance objectives for, I think this is Q4, and realistically Q1 as well. So as part of the wider initiative to look at options for curbing the rate of growth in the public sector.
So can you please specify what the
There is no structured review by me, if that's what you're asking.
No.
No.
So what are the chief executive is looking across the whole government?
Yes, that's what I was just explaining, but you interrupted.
Yeah, so what the outcomes of you looking across the whole government we can, would it be in the form of the report? Would it be a recommendation to the Council of Ministers?
Oh, that's not a specific arm's length body limited.
No, we specifically ask about specifically.
So you want to understand what might happen for ALBs within that wider review. So as part of my performance objectives, the Chief Minister has asked us to go through a process with the Council of Ministers through a series of workshops this winter, including of which one of the objectives is to explore options and bring forward options for a rationalisation of the ALO/ALB estate. I think the Chief Minister's on record as saying that these organisations have been set up over the past 3 decades for moment in time reasons, and maybe collectively we haven't got round to thinking about whether all of that architecture and governance is still appropriate going forward. So he wants that to be considered in workshops during the course of this winter with the Council of Ministers. Whether that emerges from policy under development and workshops into a published report is unclear at this stage.
Would you share your views, and would you have any concerns if the entities, deliver entities specifically, deliver value for money when we have all of them?
Do you mean that when you say delivery entities, is that a specific category of ALO you're thinking about? Or?
I mean, for example, economic development entities, art entities.
Oh, yeah, okay, so I think I can...
But the current structure and how it's structured and funded, do you think they deliver value for money?
I think I'll refer back to things I've said previously. It was a surprise to me coming into government, almost intuitively, to see how many organisations there were that the government was trying to deliver objectives through, in addition to its own direct departments. I was surprised about the absence of a sort of framework to guide the creation of these bodies. But I think I understand better now, having spoken with colleagues and ministers, the sort of almost organic evolution of all of this thing. In terms of value for money, I'd say a couple of things. The first part of the exercise we're doing, frankly, is just understanding the data, which is a bit harder than it sounds, because one of the issues with the LOs is they're not under common disclosure arrangements for even basic things like pay and rations. So the first thing is to gather the data. The second thing is to agree principles with COM for a review, which we haven't done yet. But definitely within that, we need to look at organisation by organisation if we want to understand value for money, we need to look at the founding principles of the organisation. Why did we set it up? What was the founding rationale, the raison d'etre? And did they deliver against that? Or did something change? Did their role evolve because ministerial priorities changed? And I think one of the things you can observe with these organisations, if you take one of the economy ones as an example, let's exemplify with Digital Jersey. I think that was set up in something like 2014. When you look at the reason, the founding sort of value for money metric in setting it up was that it could help to increase employment in the digital sector. I think it had a net target of something like 1,500 jobs by 2020. We can see from the data that wasn't achieved, and even today we're nowhere near that level of net increase in jobs. So these are things that we need to go back and look at. That was set up, Digital Jersey, purely in value for money terms as an effectiveness play. It was by setting this up, we will be effective because we will create jobs that wouldn't otherwise be there. So these are things we're going to have to look at. All I would say in their defence is it's very likely over those 10 years that different ministers have changed priorities and the organisation's rationale has evolved with those ministerial priorities. So if you look at it today in 2025, job creation isn't really one of its big strategic priorities.
But what I hear from you, and thank you, because I completely agree in this. I'm sharing your concerns because where I'm sitting as the chair of PAC, when I'm looking at it has been set in 2014, but 2025, the priorities change, the objective changed. There's lots of changes. We don't have exact data. We have a gathering
Hopefully
data.
we'll have that soon.
Hopefully, but no. And if I'm looking back now to the public finance manual, and in public finance manual retail, the responsible accountable officers should consider carrying out structured review of any or all arm's length bodies for which they are responsible and listed in the sections, in exception of state-owned entities, on either periodic or ad hoc basis. This review should include structured and strategic considerations of value for money. If I'm reading this from the public finance manual, and I'm thinking about the example that you gave around Digital Jersey that we both agree, should the chief officer from the economy at any time put the structured and strategic consideration value for money and carry the review as per public finance manual? Or do you believe that should is a requirement and not just an option? Or it is an option, kind of saying we are okay?
Well, I think if you follow that example, and we need to do the work, I don't know, but it's highly likely that at various points in the last 10 years, the expectations placed in that organisation have evolved. So they may have shifted from whatever the original intention was to some new intention. For example, I know with the organisation you mentioned, during COVID, there was quite a significant change in the expectations of that organisation. And we've seen since COVID, from the economy department, new expectations around overseeing the award of challenge funding and grants to encourage various forms of economic growth. So we need to understand the evolution over time. I think structured reviews, having only really seen one up close, which was Jersey Sport, structured reviews are fairly big exercises in their own right. So it's not clear to me that the right thing to do is to mandate a structured review for a set period of time. It may be, but I think more importantly from my perspective is rather than start to make interventions on individual organisations, I would like with the Council of Ministers to have a broader strategic debate about the overall architecture of it and whether it's fit for purpose before we look at individual organisations. As I say, in the case of the economy, there's 5 or 6 at least economic agencies. We'd like to have that kind of debate, and I think that's the debate we will have over over the winter. The final thing I would say is, of course, that the role of these organisations and potential options for them can in any event always come up during policy development. You know, if there are particular ministerial priorities, if we're looking at things like Invest in Jersey and what the ambitions of the Council of Ministers are under Invest in Jersey, as part of understanding how that might be enabled, you can easily find situations where you're considering the role of these organisations in policy under development. But that's very different, of course, from taking a stand-back structured review.
Okay. Just a minute, Jane.
I was interested that you said that we lack, or government lacks, some of the data required to gather a comprehensive understanding of the ALBs and the ALO positions. But I also know that each year they submit to a fairly rigorous grant proposal negotiation with government that involves setting KPIs and measuring performance against KPIs. It's a standard condition that every quarter each grant receiving body reports to government explaining progress against KPIs. I was wondering what additional information you required over and above those annual reviews.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's what we want to explore is, again, there may be good reasons for why the current estate is the way it is. But I certainly think when you come in fresh, one of the things you want to explore is why there isn't more consistency. For example, many organisations set up in the most recent years come under the aegis of SEB, which means that from a pay and rations perspective, they come under pretty much equivalent arrangements to other employees in the public service, and they kind of are overseen by SEB. That would be true, for example, of the Care Commission would be one example. But that's been a relatively recent development, and many of the ones that were created way back when do not come under SEB, so they've got independent arrangements for pay and so forth, and they've got boards. The disclosure arrangements aren't consistent. The obligations, when you look at either the law or you look at the equivalent of the Articles of Association, we don't have the same obligations on every organisation to disclose information. And I think these are things which we need to consider whether they ought to be tidied up.
But getting back to the Chair's original question, isn't the annual grant negotiation the opportunity to test, verify, establish value for money?
Yeah, definitely in the context of the budget report, whatever they want to achieve in their departmental business plans at that point in time is an opportunity to do that, and that's something that we've been focusing on. I think if you're looking at a review, however, you want to look, or a value for money review, you want to look at the body of work of that organisation over a longer time period, and that's where, as you start to go back, you know, it's not as straightforward as it should be. That being said, the first part of this work, not just for ALBs, this is true for the whole of government, they're just one part of it. The first part of this work that we're doing with COM is to actually say everyone's entitled to their opinion, but not to their own facts. We need to create a fact base that everyone says, okay, those are the best facts available. And that applies to all parts of government and including the LBs, and that's what we're working towards. I don't think we've quite got there yet, but we're close to that point.
Just so to be absolutely clear, you're telling us that the annual grant proposal does not represent the best possible answers for value for money and whether performance measures are being met.
It provides some of them, but you know, all these organisations were set up for different things. Some were set up for technical efficiency reasons. Some were set up for the complete opposite. Andium Homes wasn't set up to deliver less expensive housing. It wasn't set up to deliver technical efficiency, really. It was set up for different reasons. So you have to go back and try and understand which dimension of value for money, if any, was in the founding principle of that organisation. What was really hoped for from Andium in a value for money sense of that word? Was it allocative efficiency? Was it technical efficiency? Was it economy? Did you just think they could get things done for less money? Or was it effectiveness? And doing that properly is a big piece of work.
And it can't be done in the annual grant review process.
Some of it can be done in the annual grant review process, but if you want to take a longer term view rather than just a moment in time view,
Structured review.
it's a structured review, yeah.
But it means that we need structured review to understand if they're meeting objectives.
Just on the same thing, the strategic review, just taking the example of Digital Jersey.
Yeah.
Now you're saying that we're going to go back and step back and look at the holistic picture of it. But don't you think some of organizations, if we do that, we're going to leave part the strategic advantage of these kind of organizations, like Digital Jersey? Why we are still lagging behind? Because we are chasing what's happening in the world. From my perspective, I think Digital Jersey was set up to be a leader in IT going forward, but now COVID came in, we had different things come in. So why shouldn't we just have some organizations set up separately where we have to do it rather quickly? Because if you have a objective of increasing jobs, AI is going to reduce that, but we can still have an objective of being a leader in the world for technical services. So these organizations, shouldn't we just look at what their purpose has been and look at the advantages? Because if we do it on a longer run, we're going to be not having any strategic advantage of these organizations.
Yeah, I think it's a perfectly fair point. I think for all of them, you want to understand what we hope to get.
Yep.
And to kind of almost put that to bed one way or the other. And if we didn't get it, that was conscious, i.e. that priorities changed, or someone in 2020, in the example you used for Digital Jersey, said, well, we hope for 1,900 jobs, we've only got 700 or whatever the number was, or 1,200. How much, how big of a deal is that? Or actually, have we had other unintended benefits from this organisation and we need to evolve its role? There'd be that sort of discussion. So what was it for? And then what's its current state? What's it currently doing against what we originally invested, put our equity, that's the equity investment, in that case of £50 million and counting. So what did we get for the money we put in? If it's different, are we still happy? And what is it we think we need for the future? So I think to do those things is quite important. Now, the future bit really is the prerogative of ministers, because that's a matter of policy. But that's a great example you're talking about there, which is in the 10 years or so, or 11 years of Digital Jersey's history, of course, you've seen rapid evolution from data and digital into AI and other things.
It's interesting
But
that...
let's make it a conscious decision, is my point. Let's not just let things happen by the osmosis.
But it is some contradictions, and we need to get maybe later, not today, we'll continue this discussion, because you said they were set up, what we hope to get from them. The situation is changed, and there might be new objectives should be set up. But to understand what we hope, we are getting now, does it meet requirements, and what's next needs to be done some strategic review to tell to the ministers or to the assembly saying this is what's happened, this is what's going forward. But I understand you are looking holistically. My other theme in your response, and I completely agree with you as well, interestingly, you acknowledge limited oversight of the pay terms and conditions of LBs. What visibility do you currently have of these arrangements, or what influence and how might oversight can be strengthened? And I tell what we really challenge us, especially Chief Officer for Economy, when they saw that their wages double compared to the responsibility of yourself, Treasurer, at the government, at the civil service, and they're actually states delivery agencies. So it's a round framework. We are not asking about state-owned entities, at least some framework exists there. I'm asking about the states.
Not the SOEs, the other
Net
one.
OECs. In your letter, you talked about that we have really or limited oversight and what can be done, because, visitors, it's one of the examples. The numbers are falling, but we have discretionary payments.
Yeah, this is why I think we need to have an overall discussion rather than a case-by-case discussion. Again,
is it something happening?
They all have nuances. What's happening, of course, is the raising of the awareness of the fact that they're all quite different. We've raised awareness of the data in this case, which shows the evolution of the disclosures in their annual reports and pay. We don't know if there are any other features there, medical insurance and things that need to be taken into account. But yet we're definitely doing that data exercise to understand the evolution of paying conditions in those bodies and how it relates to the evolution of paying conditions in, as best you can tell, equivalent senior civil service roles. So, as I mentioned before, we're getting the data together to inform the debate so that we don't have...
When we'll see action, when we
tyranny
have
of-
outcome approximately.
Well, as I said to you at the start, that's designed for a series of workshops with the Council of Ministers and indeed with the Assembly. It will really be for the Council of Ministers and the Chief Minister to determine where that goes in terms of an outcome. At the moment, the structure we've got is very much the one I described as let's get agreement on what the facts are, let's debate that and understand. Once we know the facts, the next stage is for the Council of Ministers to agree a set of principles to review the size and shape of the public service, and those principles to some extent will determine the nature of the options that we're able to bring forward.
But currently, Chief Officer and you as a Principal Accountable Officer need to ensure value for money.
Yeah, so let's
And
be
this
clear,
is kind of, for me...
That's Public Finance Manual 101, which we've discussed.
Yes.
BEU.
Yeah, and this is why I'm asking if anything happening, because remuneration and grants, day-to-day management
yeah.
with these state delivery entities, it's on the level of the chief officer. The minister is not involved in...
Precisely. So to coin a phrase, in the meantime, the in the meantime use. So SOEs you know about, recently created ALOs tend to be under the aegis of the SEB. The historic ones who are neither of those two, there's no specific action being taken in the short term. Like all of these things, resources are what resources are. We'd rather do the broader piece of work and then return to that body of organisations and say, okay, what are our conclusions in terms of governance, in terms of issues like this? So rather than going in piecemeal, we're taking a step back and looking at the overall thing.
There was also a very recent control added to the PFM in August, so very recently, that grant-funded bodies in receipt of more than £250,000 should the minister should take into account changes to pay, executive pay, but of course, given that was only August, it's unlikely that we haven't had any go through that cycle.
It'll be next spring.
Mm-hmm. Andrew, can I just pick up on the... so I think what we're hearing is that you, first of all, you don't see any point in structured reviews being undertaken by chief officers because they can decide if they want or they don't want to do those. So there is a question there as to whether there's any point to it. The second thing we've heard is that your oversight and your scrutiny of what the public sector is offering through these ALOs and entities in terms of value for money has some basis in history which doesn't relate to what is required now in terms of a public sector offer. Is that what you're saying?
No, what I would say is that, again, it's not just about arm's length bodies. I appreciate you're asking about this. We're applying the same mindset to all the departments of government.
Right, okay.
It's every pound that's spent, not just the pound that happens to be spent by these organisations. So I think that's one thing. All I'm saying is that once we've agreed principles, it will be, I think, an understandable next step, armed with the data, to say what was the original intention, to what extent was it met. So let's deal with the look back value for money issue. You were set up for technical efficiency. Have you delivered it? Yes or no, and why not? And then let's look at what you're doing currently and its relevance to current policy and island-wide outcomes. And then let's understand if there's any future view that says that should change again. And you've already mentioned a number of things already in the meeting, EI and other things. Clearly the world is changing quite rapidly, not just for technology reasons, geopolitical reasons. So I think it's important that we take quite a considered look at these delivery vehicles, which are of government and funded by government, and their appropriateness for what we think we might be facing into in the next 10 years. I think that's going to be a big part of it. One of my concerns, which I think I shared the last time, is that we've got to be much more thoughtful in future about setting things up, because they're very hard to close down. And you set things up for a moment in time reason, and so many of them are moment in time reasons. Digital Ger has been one. And then it develops its life, and it's not got a sort of built-in redundancy clause, so it evolves and evolves and evolves. And I think we just need to be just a bit more thoughtful about this.
So
and
do you
that's
have
true
an
for every
idea-
government. The Scottish government's having the same review,
Yeah.
the Welsh government's having the same review, because everyone's got to the point of thinking, why have we got such a complicated estate that we're trying to deliver through?
Sorry, just because I don't want to lose the point. So you talked about the different sort of values or metrics that were attributed to these organisations
When they were set up,
previously.
yeah.
Do you envisage any change to those kind of indicators, or do you think you will develop a different way of measuring the allocative value and efficiency of these as opposed to the value for money? Have you got a sense
Well,
of how you're going to be able to
I can certainly
communicate to
give
the
you a
public
sense
the
of
value
things that I
that
want
those
to
will be
bring to the
doing?
table, because like every other area, these are actually, this is policy, this is about ministers and what they want. But, you know, if you look at one of the things we've done as part of this work is review at some length the body of work by the CNAG in this area, which, and again, not so much to look at individual organisations, but when you look at all the reviews by the CNAG and by this committee, and you look for the patterns are around things like governance, value for money, and so on and so forth. I think when you look at that, one of my views that I have shared and will share again deep in the work is we need to be, I think, super clear about the basis on which we're setting the organisation up, or if it's going forward, the basis on which we're going to judge its success. Because value for money in public service is like a bar of soap in the shower. It's very hard to hold on to. And we want to be super clear. Is this technical efficiency? Do we expect things to happen quickly and differently by doing it this way? Is it allocative efficiency? Is this a cost-benefit analysis? This is better. Is it effectiveness? What is it that you're targeting? Now, with some of them, like Andy and Holmes, I can see very clearly what they were targeting, and I would say it's been pretty successful. Mm-hmm. With others, I can see that what they were initially targeting isn't what they're now targeting. And the question begs, have you changed what you're targeting because you couldn't do it and you didn't want to make yourself extinct? Or are you changed what you're targeting because something changed in the world and it made sense and everyone agreed it? That's not so clear when you look back the way.
So just finally, so just to close the loop on it, so given that in the PFI it talks about a structured review process, do you have any suggestions as to whether or not that needs to change in terms of the way in which that structured review process will happen? And the second part to my question is, is it likely that that structured review process could be redundant, to use a word that you've used, and that it becomes actually the role of the chief executive and the role of the council of ministers, you alluded to, political decisions as to how often and how frequent those reviews take place?
It definitely will, whatever framework's put in place will obviously have to be endorsed by ministers, because there are resource implications and other implications. I think, you know, when you've got, depends how many of these things you think they are, some definitions from the CNAG, you can be in the 40s, others you can be in the 70s, others you can be over 100. But let's just say for sure we can all agree that there's at least 50 of these things. Doing a structured review every X years for 50 organisations is a major resource undertaking of government, and it falls into my view Parkinson's law. If we had 5 or 6 organisations with very clear remits, then I think it'd be much easier to say, okay, at that level, we can have very structured periodic reviews of those organisations. So I think it will depend on where we
But it's not.
end up. At the moment, it's just such a vast estate that, you know, it's unrealistic. And I think for accountable officers, and I think you might have heard from Paul Wiley as well, our preference is to use our convening and communication tools to manage these relationships. We need, I think, a fairly major trigger event to go for a structured review. I think that's the risk. Looking back, that's clearly the risk assessment of officers in practice, because there's only been a handful of them in the period since COVID. So I think, again, you've got to be realistic for an accountable officer to then say, I really want to do a structured review of X. They've got to have a really, really good reason. And these things are political, they're not operational. There's a lot of politics.
Let's move to the sector, because I reminded about the time, yeah.
Okay, so just to carry on about sort of how these organisations work together. So what are your views on 3 SOEs, Andy, Ports of Jersey and SOJDC, delivering infrastructure projects? And how are you maintaining oversight to ensure there is no duplication? And can you, a couple of sub-questions there, can you outline any collaboration between JDC, Andium and Ports of Jersey can be structured to support regeneration and housing objectives? And furthermore, what oversight do you have of delivery entities within the economic area, Digital Jersey Business Visit, to ensure there is no duplication of these functions?
Yeah, I mean, it's, as like all these questions, they're great questions. In my category of surprises, I'd imagined in the setting up of these organisations there'd be a bit more clarity over the obligations to collaborate and to pursue value for money, not just within an organisation, but between that organisations and other organisations. I'd have expected that to be a bit clearer, but then again, when they set up one organisation, they probably didn't realise they were going to set up the other one 5 years later. So again, it's all a bit organic. So I think in general, we could do with clarity on expectations if we come to revise the role and articles of association. That being said, this is an area where using the existing organisation of government, be it departmental business plans, be it the regeneration steering group at ministerial level, be it the corporate property board within I&E, these are areas where we do try and foster and encourage collaboration while accepting that there is no requirement in the Articles of Association for those organisations to collaborate around our estate management strategies. It's the Good Person School of Government that's in operation here. So we don't have powers of compulsion, but we do try and convene and encourage them. I think you can see in recent times improving collaboration. I think the sort of strategic work like Invest in Jersey, for example, and trying to get people to really think about the long term has helped to bring parties together to collaborate. You can see good collaborations around the nascent plans for Fort Regent. We can see improving collaborations in aspects of housing. But I think all of it could be elevated. All of it could be elevated. And you know, one of the observations which the current infrastructure minister would always make is, why have I ended up with 4 developers? And that kind of sums up the organic nature of the way this estate has operated. SOJDC was unmistakable. If you look at its Articles of Association, it was to be the developer, commercial developer for the Government of Jersey, really. That was its job. You know, Andium's job was to operate the social housing stock, not to be a developer. Ports of Jersey was to operate the Ports of Jersey and the airport. It wasn't to be a developer. We now find ourselves with 3 or 4 development functions, and we're Crawley. We're the same size as Crawley, so it's not obvious that we need to have 4 development functions inside our organisations. as opposed to saying we're 100,000 people, someone develop. And if you're the commercial developer, if I need something commercial developed, I'll give it to you and you'll get it done for me. Or if I need housing, I'll give it to you and you'll get it done for me. So these are areas where the collaboration needs elevated within the current structure, but we have to understand whether the structure itself is getting in the way of the collaboration and value for money. So I think they're perfectly fair.
I mean, there's lots of obviously cultural issues as well, because obviously each one has their own set of governance, and these are my toys, they're your toys. Yesterday we had a scrutiny meeting with talking about the property holdings, Jersey Property Holdings, and what exactly their function was within government, because the fact that you have the hospital, you have the healthcare sector, you have education holding on to various properties, and actually Property Holdings was set up to manage everything, and there's just this, nobody actually does what it says on the tin almost.
I mean, I think
I kind of wonder how do you get that back into, how do you get them back into the box, as it were?
Yes, well, I think that's why we have to have the review. This is Parkinson's law you're describing. It's like how we ended up here. And there's all sorts of organisational politics and other reasons which you've described. But if we're in the pursuit of value for money and effectiveness within value for money, it doesn't obviously make sense for it to be the way it is. If you look at it through the prism of what organisations and boards do once they exist, they fight for their existence and they develop their business model as much as they can, and they always, quite rightly, they and their chief executives explore the outer edges of the strategy and the business model. In our case, it's led to what you've described, which is multiple development functions.
So how do you
inside government?
So what is the process then to turn the clock back?
Well, the process is the one I described. Is let's not argue about the facts. Then let's agree some principles for looking at, per the objective that we've now got from the Chief Minister, whether there are opportunities for amalgamation and rationalisation of this estate. But so let's agree those principles, and let's apply those principles thoughtfully to problems like the one you just described.
So is this a decision for you to make, or is this a political decision?
Political.
You see it as a political decision to be made?
100%.
Okay.
But to make political decision, you need to present research in papers. When this research in papers would be presented to the politicians to make decision?
Well, we're working our way through the timetable. That in itself depends. The pace of that depends on other priorities. But realistically, we want to get. I would think we want to get to the end of this winter with super clarity on the facts, on an agreed set of principles as to why we are where, why are we where we are? Why have things evolved in this way? Because there are good reasons. There are reasons why they've evolved this way, and what, if anything, do we want to do next? And I would see it as our job as civil servants, now that we've got this remit in our objectives, it's our job to develop policy options to say, well, you've got different options. If that's your ultimate goal, you've got different options to deal with it. And at the moment, this work is situated within the ultimate goal work of curbing the growth in the public service. It's not really situated within a pure value for money effectiveness thing. It's more to say, do we really need to deploy our resources this way? Is there any way we can economise?
I think what strikes me so much is, and obviously being a business owner, is sort of we're in a dynamic marketplace, as it were, a world which is evolving and changing. These organisations are just, as you described them, sort of built up and built up. What I'm struggling to understand is why is there this inability? We recognise there's a problem. We recognise there's an issue. To actually go, we're 100,000 people on this island. We should be able to, and we're quite a flat organisation in the grand scheme of things. Why is it so difficult to?
Well, I mean, you've held one of these portfolios.
Well, I have. Yeah, only temporarily.
I definitely think.
What's the blockers?
In the area that we're now talking about, which is land and land use and asset use, GPH, SOGDC. That is the most politicised issue in Jersey. I mean, there's nothing more political in Jersey than what to do with a piece of land or what to do with an asset once it's put in that piece of land. that people have multiple opinions on that, and it makes for very complicated processes. You're right to say having many organisations created in that space probably further complicates the process. For sure, I think for Jersey going forward on every dimension, not just in this, Jersey needs to rediscover agility pretty quickly. It needs to discover agile ways of approaching the issues that it confronts, but also the things that it wants to achieve as a matter of policy. And these organisations, if the way that they've evolved, if one of the downsides of that is they reduce your agility, they give you process over outcome, then obviously one would have thought that the political consensus will be for reform. But we need to see.
If you were just checking, if you would like to ask any other question around strategic property management or not. I mean, we don't have it. We don't we're really restricted to the time. So pick up.
I'll stop there because I think we've tried to. Do you want me to there's some other
No,
ones
it
here.
depends if you.
Yeah.
I think maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've spoken about Jersey Property Holdings to a degree. Yes, I guess this is about accountability.
Maybe when will the comprehensive delivery plan with clear responsibilities and timeline for the implementation to be published for? We're
For the
talking about, for the
for the
Island
corporate-
Public Estate Strategy. It was Q2 2026, I think. But
Yeah, I mean, in this area of overall area of property management, estates management, I think it's fair to say we've been trying to achieve three things, big things in the last 18 months. One of them, again, is data. We felt that we were at the mercy of anecdote because every asset's so politicised, be it the Lido, gas place, whatever it may be. So we've invested a lot to get, I think, what most people would say now is a very comprehensive empirical view of the estate in terms of its condition, in terms of its life cycle maintenance. That's been a big piece of work because I think that fact base is already proving very helpful in trying to engage more effectively in policy, whether it be for Invest in Jersey or anything else. The second thing we were trying to do, and I think we've started to do it, was to use that fact base to almost turn the tide on fairly systemic underinvestment in the estate, both maintenance and capex. So use the data to turn that around, and you start to see now in the future budgets that the monies available for the maintenance of that estate and the monies available for capital investment in that estate are starting to turn around. That's long overdue. And then the third thing that we've looked at, admittedly policy under development, was outline business cases for saying, is there something that we could do with JPH on its own or in concert with others that would accelerate this strategy? Is there a structural option? So those are the things we've been working on.
But my question was very simple. I mean, I think it was when a comprehensive delivery plan with clear responsibilities and timeline for the property estate strategy will be published, because I started to review property estate strategy from 2021. I think we published the first report. It's 4 years, and it was follow-up CNAG reports, and there is lots of reports. So we are looking for some delivery plan that we can say this is the delivery plan.
Yeah,
4
so
years from the
on that particular plan, from memory, there's 52 discrete actions in it. 11 to 12 of them are completed. About half of the remainder are kind of in action. And I think the others, the ones which aren't underway, I think in part rely on us doing some of the other strategic work I described. They in part require us to try and overcome some of the resistance that's still there to the corporate landlord model. But I would say if you ask the team, they would say, yeah, they're making appreciable progress on that 52-point plan, which I think is the one you're referring to.
Maybe we need to request an update on that.
Yeah, they can give you that.
Okay, we'll move to the staff recruitment and retention.
Thank you. Andrew, I'd just like to ask some questions about workforce, if I might. could you tell us how many workforce plans, how many departments have completed their workforce plans at all?
Most departments have a workforce plan, at least as we understand it. Whether everyone thinks it's what they're looking for, I don't know. Those workforce plans, alongside their target operating models, or some people call them service delivery plans, those are dynamic. Those are iterative. In other words, they're constantly revisiting them every time they do a restructure, every time they tweak something. There are some exceptions to that. Health is one of those exceptions to that, and to a lesser extent, SIPES is an exception to that, and I can explain why they're an exception, because I appreciate they're very big departments. But in terms of workforce planning being a continuous activity and something that you're constantly returning to, most departments, certainly the operational departments, have those. Health might say that they do have one. To be fair, they've certainly been working on one, but not one that I think is yet complete. And I would say the same for parts of SIPES, not all of SIPES.
So it's just those two departments that you think haven't got a workforce plan?
Yeah, and the reasons for that are important. The health team were working quite hard on a strategic workforce plan. I'll go into that one in a minute. But the health team were working on one. I asked them to hold back on that because we obviously had a ministerial team come in and, 2 years ago, 18 months ago, who wanted to embark on a fairly fundamental strategic review and reorganisation of the health service. So we moved from trying to have a universal workforce plan from health to saying, okay, where are the areas that we're most concerned about within health in terms of running the service, and those were areas that you know about, like nursing and so forth. So really we rediverted the resources into dealing with today's problems today, and the idea is that we should return to a strategic workforce plan for health when we feel that they've reached, are close to reaching the end of this strategy change. A similar thing in SIPES, where of course, we've had very targeted plans and improving plans in areas like children's services and in the past around teaching assistants and things. But overall, given the demographic changes that are happening in the island, given some of the other priorities in education, we feel that's an area where we probably need to look afresh strategically at our provision and look at workforce planning alongside it. The final one I should have said is JHA, which had embarked on strategic workforce planning. But again, and I take responsibility for this, given the nature of that department, I felt that it was better for that to drop below the level of the department into the individual service areas, because it's got customs and immigration over here, it's got police over here, it's got fire, it used to have ambulance. So to me, it felt like we had to look at those services almost discreetly rather than thinking about them as part of justice and home affairs.
Okay. So what you're saying is that your approach to getting the best value out of the workforce at the moment is to target the focus on. Are you aware that there are some workforce assumptions being made as part of the new healthcare facilities in terms of future projections? And are you aware of, are these being aligned to some of the ways in which you think workforce planning is happening in health at the moment?
Yes, exactly. And that's one of the reasons why I didn't feel it made sense for the sort of strategic workforce plan cart to go before the horse. That work is still very much fluid, I would say. And the resources that we had originally thinking about strategic workforce plan overall are now engaged in those discussions you described. Okay,
thank you. So in terms of a strategic workforce plan for the future, do you think we will see one that can be moderated in terms of service change, but will we have a proper baseline in terms of the public sector workforce requirements?
Do you mean for the overall public service?
Yes.
I don't know is the answer to that.
Do you think we should have one?
I'm not convinced.
Can you tell us why?
Yeah, I feel that we need to have, it's such a multifaceted service. It's back to this thing of we're not a unitary local authority with defined functions. We're not a central government. We're some sort of mix of the two. And then we've got all of the things that would be in trusts and other structures in bigger countries all mixed in together. So we have very highly operational blue lights and things like this. We have, frontline public service workers dealing with the public every day. Then we've got a permanent civil service. So I think we need to have a good old, my view is we need to have a good old look at the size and shape and role of public service in Jersey and try and reach a stronger consensus on that than I believe exists today.
And how soon
And then
do you
our
think that
strategic
needs to
workforce
happen?
plan would make more sense.
Okay. How soon do you think that needs to happen?
Well, I would hope that the work that we're doing this winter, if nothing else, could represent some sort of blueprint for whoever's in government next to say, here's something I prepared earlier, here's a fact base, here's some thoughts based on our best understanding of the present and the future, here's some options. So I would hope that we get to a point where if it's not this government, given where we are in the cycle, the next government would feel well prepared to start to tackle those issues. My fear, and I take responsibility for this because it's not everyone agrees around ELT, my fear is if we ploughed into a strategic workforce plan without doing what I first described, then it might just be one of those interesting documents that doesn't, drive.
How do you keep that sustainability going in terms of frontline service delivery if there is that level of variation in terms of how people are planning for what they need to deliver their frontline service?
Yeah, it's difficult because of the multifaceted nature of the sector, but we kind of, it's a heat map. We know the areas, for example, we know the areas where Jersey faces the biggest diseconomies of scale in providing a service because we're very subscale. Health is obviously one of them, prison, things like that. We know that's kind of tricky for us. So in the heat map, we tend to focus in these areas. Probably the best recent example of that is children's services. Sustaining a workforce plan for children's services when you've seen such a material increase in the demand for that service, particularly post-COVID, is a real challenge for Jersey. So we tend to in the heat map, focus the resources we've got on those areas and trying to develop more sustainable solutions for those areas rather than worry about the whole thing.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
So, sort of. I think there are some things that raise concern as to where workforce issues are more problematic than in some areas than others. Do you have any particular areas of concern where that is happening?
Well, it depends what you mean by problematic. I'd say one thing that
I can qualify
concerns
that
me.
if that helps.
Well, my answer to your thing would be sickness and absence.
Yes.
But in the case of sickness and absence, obviously this is a major issue, well, frankly, across the UK, and it now seems Jersey, less so other countries. But in sickness and absence, we have been steadily bringing different departments and functions onto the new system, the SAP system and the HR module.
Yeah.
That module, it makes it much easier and more efficient to record sickness and absence for managers in particular and for employees. So there's no doubt that the rise over the last year in sickness and absence, we think a lot of is detection. We think it was always happening. We just now got better data on what was always happening, if that makes sense, because we're not seeing material sort of productivity disruptions in those areas. That being said, now that we've got the data, even if it was underreported in the past, what the data is showing us is that we have higher sickness and absence than would be my experience having run another major employer in Jersey. It's out of whack with that. We have got a preliminary view in some areas that it's out of line with comparable organisations in other countries, but the SAB have asked for a deeper dive in that, a more empirical dive. So that's the one area that's worrying me, and bear in mind that the one big department that's not yet on that system is health. And health, well, the numbers will go up again because health is we think one of the areas where we have the biggest challenge. So that's worrying us. What have we done about it is probably going to be your next question, but I'll wait for that.
If I could just interrupt you before you go on to that. Are you, no matter what the percentage rate is, and I think you're right in terms of it's better transparency around the data that's being collected, but clearly there's a cost to every percentage increase that happens. There's a cost to the public service. And that, do you see that as an area of efficiency, driving down those sickness rates that will actually improve the financial position across the sector? Or do you think that this is a problem that is just attributed to the fact that it's hard to recruit, more people are put under pressure in terms of trying to cover and whatever? Do you see that there's any solutions to actually addressing the increase in the sickness rate that's happened, particularly over the last couple of years?
Well, I think given what's happening right across the world on this, one best be humble until one fully understands it. But things we can say today is, obviously as a matter of fact, if we could outperform in sickness and absence, it would increase our technical efficiency as an organisation. It would reduce, it would reduce costs because we are having to backfill and incur agency costs and all sorts of other things. So,
do you have a sense of how much it is costing?
Not yet, but it's something that we're going to, when we, now that we think that we're on a stable and accurate trend in terms of the data, it's one of the things we're going to enumerate for the SEB. So obviously there'd be things to be saved there. The other issue with it is that it also is an indicator of disengagement in some areas, which can affect all aspects of productivity. So there's definitely a huge amount to be gained from trying to perform much better in this area. But in the first instance, we're just concerned about it from understanding it even more so from a welfare perspective. So we are doing deep diagnostics into categories like stress to understand the different components of that, which we can start to do from the data around whether it's stress outside of work, which is then affecting your ability to work, or whether it's stress inside of work that's the primary driver. So things like this we need to try and understand better. We've got areas, we've got 3 areas where we're an outlier. One is that. One is various forms of muscular industry, where we're an outlier, and one of them is basically coughs and colds.
Okay.
And we just want to get to the bottom of it as much as we can with the data to understand exactly what's happening. In the meantime, we've introduced various things which we can talk about if you want to try and improve in the meantime.
Now, I think what you've described is that you sound as though you are monitoring this, quite closely, and you're taking an active role in the monitoring of this.
Yeah, very much so. Okay. Myself and the Vice Chair of SEB are making this a priority area. As I say, I think we've concluded from the data it was always happening. We're just now measuring it properly rather than we've suddenly had a big... We can't relate it to being a sudden development to all the other things that we know about the service. But now we know how big of an issue it is, we need to make it a priority.
And how soon do you think you're going to be able to enumerate it?
Well, we're hoping to do that in the next 3 months, both enumerate it and here I don't want to commit Chief People Officer to stuff she'll hang me for when she comes back from holiday, but we want to enumerate it, and we also want to have a better comparative analysis than we've got at the moment. What should be the realistic benchmarks? Who should we benchmark ourselves against? It's easy for areas like police and so forth, you can get statistics, but how should we treat some of the other areas? And because I think we need to understand what good looks like, and then figure out how to get there.
Very quickly, because you mentioned data quite a lot. As you mentioned, you're using SAP in health.
In that area, yeah.
In that area. Are we using any live data feeds which are comparing some certain areas, supposedly the time spent by a certain group of employees and what's the productivity has been? Because data, if we got SAP, we can have management information actually live and look at that and address those issues quite quickly, especially like if we're looking at absences, sickness, 2024, if we have the spot data, we can maybe shuffle some resources and improve that one. So are we looking at the data live, or is it still something in progress? Because SAP can do it.
Some of that, I'd rather get the Chief People Officer to write to you. We're also under some restrictions on what we can do with our data based on historic agreements with trade unions, for example. So we've just got to be careful in this area, but definitely Leslie would be better able to give you an update on that, or I can the next time.
Because data now is like with the data improvements and everything, especially the SAP and other softwares, we can have actually live data, and that can help us supposedly if certain area is facing resource shortages or anything. We can pull resources from somewhere, and somebody is underutilized, and we can help other teams with that one, which would be brilliant.
Oh, sorry, they're certainly doing that. Not so much driven simply by sickness, but across a range of things. Sorry, yeah, they have got a whole internal mobility program up and running. Sorry, I misunderstood the question.
Sorry, did you want to?
Just talking about wellness and people keeping people healthy. We talked about children's service. I'm very conscious of the fact that we've got record numbers of SEND children. We've got record numbers in CAMS. I think it's costing $6 million a year to run CAMS and things like that. Do you feel, in terms of the investment, how we invest in things like education or these big departments, do you think the investment is profiled correctly in that respect? Because it's actually more important, because obviously these issues of kids being excluded from regular school, or we're seeing vast increases in absenteeism and things like that, they are sort of they're immediate, very short-term problems, don't seem to be, they sort of don't seem to be caused, but they cost us an awful lot of money in the long run. And so one of my question probably is do you see the investment that we make is correctly targeted? We can talk about new buildings, we can talk about this, we can talk about that, but actually inherently it's about the people. It's about the people, it's about the kids, it's about that investment. Do you sense that that profile is correct?
Well, I think it's a complicated area, this. Some of our choices are constrained, which impacts our effectiveness. So we are constrained by workforce issues. We've been very constrained by the physical estate of loving homes for children, which is as politicised as everything else that's politicised in property, getting those homes in the right areas and so on and so forth. So there's been a lot of historic constraints on that service, I think, optimising what it wants to do. We're also constrained in, I think, the democracy in terms of what we do with children with complex needs on island versus what we might be able to do off island, and whether we want children in those situations to be off island or on island. It's a very complicated area. What I would say at the moment is we try to work through all those issues and run them to ground. And I think the broad consensus is that as far as possible, people wish to see a service built up in Jersey with the right estate of loving homes, with the right professional service development of social work and other services, and for wherever possible it to be done on island rather than any peripatetic or tertiary model. That's an expensive model to run, but the political commitment's been made to run that model, and that's what we're now implementing. So it's kind of early days in that, but I think if you look back historically, we clearly haven't gotten it right because the service was in crisis. Over the course of the past couple of years, it fell into crisis, and we haven't had sufficiency in the estate, for example, to house children.
Back to the
Sorry.
stuff.
Sorry.
Yeah, sorry.
It's okay. Sorry, Andrew. Can I just bring you back to some of the recommendations that were made in the annual report and accounts, and also the Controller and Auditor General's report on workforce issues?
Yeah.
So earlier on, you mentioned that workforce plans need to be dynamic and iterative. And one of the recommendations that was in the annual report and accounts was that all departments need to ensure that workforce plans are linked to available strategies and departmental business plans. And I think it was agreed that was the case. But in terms of improvement, there was no further action needed at this time. And I think what I've heard you say this afternoon is that there is quite a lot of work going on around that. So could you just clarify what is the position, and is that recommendation response, does it stand, or have you changed your mind?
Are you talking about recommendation 2?
Yes, recommendation 2 of the annual reports and accounts.
No, I think in terms of the way that the team risk assessed that recommendation based on the other things they've been trying to achieve, I think that still stands at the point in time where they made it. I think in areas like we were just discussing, now having more information and better data on sickness and absence, I think you'll find in all departmental plans that's now going to feature heavily as we go into next year. It already features heavily in the objectives and plans for people services. There's a whole set of actions have already been taken around the Absence Matters campaign within government, around advice and support to managers on the new system. There's a whole load of things going on there. So I think it's a fair challenge, Deputy, that the point where they made that risk assessment, that in itself will have to be dynamic because they're going to have to respond to sickness and absence.
So I think from what you said, you consider that maybe that risk rating has changed since that original risk assessment.
I'm not sure I'd go that far, given there might be a problem with the risk rating process in terms of how big the number has to be before it's a major or a catastrophic risk. But I think certainly those plans aren't static in any event. And the one area which will start to feature more heavily, which might not have been as front and centre even 6 months ago, is the emerging data on sickness and absence.
Yeah.
That's an example of one. I think also an area that we are beginning to explore is, if you think about it, over the past 6 years, the public service has effectively been the employer of choice in the economy. We've significantly increased our headcount, while pretty much the rest of the economy hasn't. So we've absorbed a lot of labour, and we've had a lot of labour into the economy while everyone else has been standing still. I think one of the things we want to reflect on is the issues that might present from trying to onboard a couple of thousand people in such a short pace of time.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I think that's why, from a PAC perspective, we're concerned, because if the growth has been there, then the risks are increasing from the amount of money the public is having to pay for that increase in the workforce, but not necessarily getting the return on that in terms of improved productivity because of issues like sickness and absence. So we're just trying to work through what the issues...
I think, let me take that away and understand the point you're making, and I think it's a fair one. In some areas, we do know what we're getting. You know, we've got 199 teaching assistants in the school, which was a big policy of the last minister or the current chair. We've got that in school, and we've got a very, very developed data dashboard in education to understand, are we getting returns in terms of reduced absence, reduced disruptions, children being in school. All of that's measured very, very tightly. So it's different in different places, but I think the general point of what's happening with sickness and absence, with the fact we've onboarded so many colleagues so quickly, with the fact that our turnover rates, while couldn't be said to be high, they're still higher than we would like them to be frankly, from even just a financial perspective, but also from a settling down perspective. So I think, let me speak with the Chief People Officer and write back to the chair on that.
So finally, just for me, in terms of the public hearing with the Corporate Services Scrutiny Panel, the Chief Minister said that he would revisit the response to recommendation of the report, and basically the recommendation was that there would be a consistent policy applied for the provision of government accommodation by employees, and the response from the public service was that this was not agreed in terms of recommendation. And he undertook to revisit that response. Can you confirm whether there's been any discussions with yourself about potential changes to the response to this recommendation?
You were at the same public hearing we were
Yeah,
together.
I was. There has been with the policy owner for that policy and with members of ALT. I haven't gone back to the Chief Minister on it yet.
Okay.
I think
will you undertake to do that?
I will undertake to do that. I think the issue at hand is that we probably don't have a shared view on how significant this is as a morale issue versus the sort of the reality of our need to be adaptive and agile and matching people to accommodation across the service at the moment. So we're working through that, but I will undertake to go back to him with our views and then come back to you.
Thank you. Okay. I mean, at that point, we'd want to just understand what's tolerable and what isn't, and understand the dynamic.
Yeah, no, I understand. I understand.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
Thank you. We recently shared with you our comments on the executive response to the procurement review, and you'll have noted that there is apparently quite a difference of opinion between government and ourselves and local trade organisations, including the IOD, the Chamber of Commerce, and the Construction Council. And there are a number of recommendations that we've made that were rejected by government, and we've asked you to look again at them. I was wondering whether you could give us your immediate views on the comments, please.
Procurement, yeah. So this is my views on the industry response to our response to your response.
Correct.
Even saying it out loud, that's an unusual process, but
Well,
maybe another example of
reflects the
Parkinson's
divergence
law.
of opinion, I think.
I think so. We're just not in the habit of our responses being run through that process. So, look, I am where I was whenever we discussed this. Obviously, we procure to buy the stuff we need. And pursue value for money in buying the stuff that we need. We allocate 10% in that process to social value. We think that's appropriate. We haven't been persuaded of the need to make that higher, or indeed to make it lower. The majority of our spend, even allowing for some quite big chunky items, goes into the local economy. is procured from the local economy. We've got fantastic examples from the last 2 months of major procurement into the local economy. We don't underestimate for a minute that we can always do things differently and better. But yeah, I mean, my position hasn't changed much based on what I've been able to see so far. You know, for example, the business of a fast track, light touch tender process. You know, anything under £100,000 is 3 quotes. There is no detailed tender process. We think that's as light touch as you can get while still being sensible. So we're not entirely sure why that was has been dismissed in the way it has, and why you would want something more onerous than that. So yeah, I don't really change anything on reflection from what I said before. Yeah.
So looking just at a couple of them, for example, you've rejected the more detailed scrutiny of or consideration of social value and replaced it with a 10% contribution from local providers and say that you believe that this sufficiently reflects in all circumstances the social value provided by local tenderers. How did you arrive at the 10% number, and how would you justify that to local trade organisations who clearly believe that the social value provided to the island is not adequately reflected by that blunt measure?
Well, I don't know what anyone thinks the optimal level of on-island purchasing should be, but the majority of our procurement spend is on-island. And given the inherent diseconomies of scale and scope that exist on the island, I think that's a pretty substantial achievement in itself. This is where we're in the tyranny of anecdote, when we're giving you data till we're blue in the face and it's come out of our ears. If you want to give me examples of recent procurement that haven't gone to local firms that should have, I'm all ears. But I can give you many examples where that's the opposite's the case. So, we've met with the Chamber of Commerce, we've listened to them, we've listened to other people. We feel that we can always do more. We are doing more. A lot of work by digital services, a lot of work to explain ourselves, to encourage engagement and dialogue with the Construction Council, with the architects, with everyone. We've got more commitments to try and give greater visibility on our future capital programme. The Direct Chamber of Commerce and IOD were in the other week on this. But yeah, we feel that balancing our objectives to try and purchase well for the taxpayer and the public service, our primary objective around that, we feel that broadly speaking, we're getting the balance about right.
So I think we're in a slight catch-22 position, which is that during the public hearings with those organisations, we heard and reported back to you that there was a culture of fear amongst a lot of the smaller businesses seeking to tender for local contracts, and that for that reason it was impossible to go and collect detailed data from named companies in the context of a climate of fear. They're not going to stick their heads above the parapets, and they explained that to us in public hearings. How do we get around that? You've dismissed as hearsay the data that they've collected and gone out of their way to poll their members and take detailed reports and report them back to us and from us to yourselves. How do we get around that? How do we then provide data from these organisations that will satisfy you without impacting their personal sense of security for future contracts?
What is it you would like us to achieve through our procurement that we're not currently achieving?
I'd like you to consider...
Would you like us to award more contracts to the local economy?
I think that...
Is that what you're saying?
I think that there is... the first thing I'd want to do is I'd want to collect the social value data more accurately than with a mere attribution of 10%. So a simple example would be that if a local contract, if a contract were awarded to a local IT company, for example,
Which
that
has
could
just
draw
been,
the
yeah,
skills
yesterday.
into the islands. That would be one example. Where we use Jersey-based contractors for major projects, which I believe we do for an awful lot. We've heard examples where contracts could not be awarded to local companies for the simple reason they lacked one or two small skills that they could have backfilled in had they been receiving proper feedback during the tender process, for example, or even after the tender process, so that they could have made that clear, or before the tender process started, at the pipeline publication point. So I guess the first question would be, what can government do to more accurately measure social value and reflect that in procurement? Because we don't believe it's satisfactory.
I hope and expect we've given you the data that shows how much we do procure on island, off island with local contractors. And I hope we all agree that the majority of it's procured on island. I would expect us to disagree about what the precise percentages should be. I hope we all agree that we've increased the number of outreaches into the industry so that they understand when we're procuring what we're looking for. And I hope we all agree that you've seen an increase in the digital area, for example, of contracts awarded locally. So we see a lot of progress. You know, as always in this area, we are having to deal with sometimes anecdotes, sometimes decent surveys, sometimes not decent surveys. The way we see to resolve it is just to be open and transparent and to continue the dialogue. But it's very important to know that the primary aim of our procurement is not to boost the GDP of the rest of the economy. The primary aim of our procurement is to get value for money for the taxpayer and boost the GDP of the economy that way.
I'm sure you could agree, though, that there will be circumstances in which a proper accounting of social value for a potentially slightly more expensive project could reflect, for example, tax receipts, the provision of apprenticeships, the growth of employment and skills opportunities for the island that is not accurately accounted for within a 10% overall number, and that for the island as a whole could achieve better outcomes than a marginally cheaper tender from a non-island-based supplier. And that's the reason that we keep drilling into, could we please examine social value with under a microscope rather than with the wrong end of a telescope?
Yeah, I mean, I'll take it away and think about it. All I would just say to you all gently is I think you've had this very small procurement team up at least 5 times and is, in the space of a couple of years, the senior G's been in, everyone's been in. At some point, we need to let them do their job. They're spending an awful lot of their time responding to incoming queries from everyone. I need them to do their job. And I think we need to give them a bit of space and time to do their job. We'll take away the social value thing. We'll speak again to the Chamber and the IOD. Sometimes we agree to disagree.
Thank you. I want to move on, but I will just reject that characterisation. I believe that the reason that procurement has come under greater scrutiny is because it's not believed to be effective. And so the additional amount of scrutiny is purely related to our perception of the outcomes. And so whether it's a question of greater or better communication or whether our concerns have validity, that's the reason. And we're not preventing people from getting on with a good job, nor is any other scrutiny panel. We're doing it for a real perceived benefit because of inefficiencies that are reported to us. But thank you.
But even not moving, I think the another part that we have raised, and it's about 3-year cycles, grants or commissions for charities. And it has been accepted in principle, but as you could see, it was no commitment made. Even government departments have their budget estimated, approximately budget for 4 years forward. If you would like charities to deliver services, they need to have stability to be able to recruit to deliver services. And I think the conversation about 3-year cycle or estimate cycle for the support for the grants or commission for the charities was on the table for some time. And again, in the response we received, we agree in principle, but when it will come, we don't know. And I think this is where we do need more clarity, and actually charitable
I
sector
can
needs
answer that
clarity.
one, and that's less nebulous. So I think one of the things that we need to look at in the wider study about how we've ended up with the public sector growing by a third in cash terms and a bit less than that in headcount terms in the space of 6 years is we need to understand whether one of the contributors to that was the decision to move away from effectively a 4-year budgeting cycle, a 3+1, and a budget really driven by Treasury, to an annual business planning cycle driven by COM. And one can observe at a very high level, a higher level of fiscal prudence under the old budgeting multi-year cycle than you can under the annual cycle. So that's one of the things I want to get to the bottom of in these workshops, the extent to which people feel that's a contributory factor. If I relate that to your question, as I've said before, the fiscal position of this government is precarious. It's the only way to describe it, is precarious, which is why we've got to be very careful about value for money in all its forms. Departments can't write cheques that they can't cash. They can't give 3-year commitments when they themselves are at the mercy of an annual budget cycle, which each year is very, very, very tight. So, we need to look at the structural way in which we budget, which might enable us to give better certainty to the partners that we work with. But at the moment, I can well understand why departments and AOs are reluctant to make multi-year commitments.
But we do have a budget that might change, but we do have a growth that's going, we're voting 26, 29. It is there. It might change this or that way, but the basics is there. And if departments know what their core budget and departments know what their core services they need to deliver.
Yeah, but that basic approach is only held up in the last 5 years by draining 2 of our reserves. Yeah, we've been spending more than we've been bringing in. The situation is precarious, and I think departments are all under pressure now not to make multi-year commitments that they can't be sure that they can make good on. And the situation we're in is that situation. So I think we need to look at that structural issue and then go back to how much certainty you can give to delivery partners.
Right.
The same is true for the arm's length organisations. They're on year to year as well.
Can I just come back to the point about social value, please? So again, I think we're doing the check and challenge around things that people come and talk to us about. And one of the things that I think has been really concerning is that when people have come forward with ideas that clearly they believe would bring social value, that they've been told, no, that doesn't. So how do you deal with the perception issue in terms
we're going to have to keep communicating. We're going to have to explain ourselves continually, because for every example you give me of that, I can give you 10 the other way. This is the frustrating thing. We've let in the last 6 weeks 4 major contracts all to local firms. Those local firms have won those contracts. They have been able to engage with the processes we've got and prepare their tenders to win those contracts. So we need to keep looking at it and keep getting better. I'm just very concerned that the focus on this area, and as I've said to you in this committee before, no government is good at procurement. It's not an area where governments are known to be world leaders on. It's a difficult area for any function. We've gone through a lot of work with the procurement team in terms of prioritisation, in terms of where we think they can add value and where they think maybe with our skills and resources we can't. All I can observe from that team is I can't really get them moving forward as quickly as I would like, because they are constantly looking over their shoulder, responding to incoming. You might say that's their fault, and fair enough, but the given reality is getting the right balance between them servicing incoming queries and doing what we would really love them to do, whether it be a new hospital project, whether it be the new tank at St Peter's, whatever it may be, is proving difficult.
Andrew, if I may, I think, and I would like to speak to the Director of Procurement afterwards to double check, but having spoken to her quite extensively about this, I think there's a nuance between social value as part of the procurement process and the wider and understandable definition of social value that you described earlier in terms of tax receipts, in terms of pounds spent on Jersey. So I think in terms of the procurement assessment, I think there's a difference between social value and pounds spent in Jersey. And the social value is how the tenderers come forward as part of their tender process to with the innovative ways in delivering the apprenticeship and skills type element of that which you described, as opposed to the whole part you described. So I think the Director of Procurement would probably say there's more we could do around pounds spent on Ireland, but that isn't necessarily addressed by the procurement process, and how they work that in terms of open and fair procurement is an issue that they still need to work their way through.
You've articulated the problem perfectly. Andrew's position is that he has overarching responsibility island-wide for ensuring that social value of the broader definition is incorporated. And I guess that's why we're slightly puzzled. Maybe we need to change our nomenclature here and devise a more elegant phrase for it. But it seems puzzling on our side of the table that this isn't a fundamental driver after necessity.
And also we have put a recommendation around the economic contribution that actually to have a line within the tender. So it has been rejected as well, even though that I know for over the years that the economy department did work around the economic contribution, how it can be calculated on the point base. And I'm not sure why, if we are saying the social value, it's too vague and we try to get a definition. It can be social contribution, economic contribution, or big. There is an option to break it down. But our recommendation about the economic contribution, and if it's tax receipts or it's a monetary value bringing to the island for online company, has been rejected. And what we say, let's maybe something to be reviewed, and it can be, again, we are not talking to put increase, but at some points, and it might be tend to be lost or won by 1-2 points, and it can be part of the calculation.
I think, having worked quite closely with the Director of Procurement, I think there probably has been some confusion between what was meant by social value by the committee and what was interpreted by social value as part of the procurement process, and that may be one of the reasons why that hasn't been agreed, because it's one element versus a wider definition. But
Let's
they may
revisit
look at that.
the
They may look
response to
at that.
recommendations in this case.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. You mentioned that the island's economy is precarious, and we saw last week that GDP has shrunk, and more alarmingly that GDP per capita has shrunk, which I think in an island where there's substantial income inequality, that must be a fairly terrifying prospect for many islanders. What do you see happening to GDP in the future? Do you expect it to grow, and what will happen to tax receipts?
Yeah, so I think the public finance or the fiscal position is precarious, which was what I was mentioning. One of the reasons it's become more precarious is because of weaker economic growth outside of financial services and the implications that has for income, for tax receipts. I think on the GDP numbers last week, GDP is a difficult measure of economic growth for Jersey because of the size of the finance sector within the economy, but also because of the accounting treatment of the profitability of the finance sector. So it moves quite a lot with interest rates and their impact on net interest income and deposits in the banking sector. So it can be a little bit misleading, the volatility of it. That being said, it is a source of concern because, you know, the fastest growing sector of the economy since 2018 in jobs terms has been the public sector. in terms of cash spend, it's been the public sector. So the public sector has been acting against the cycle, if you like, in the overall economy. And we've become more dependent on the contribution from financial services. So it is a worry, and that's why we've been doing, three major pieces of work. One is trying to understand if we can curb the growth in public spending against that backdrop, which we've discussed largely today. One is to use the work that we've been doing inside government to look again at the case for and the need for widespread and wide-scale capital investment into the public realm and the core infrastructure of the island to boost its productivity. And the final thing is we're knee-deep in a study in the competitiveness of the financial services sector, which the Minister is due to report on in late winter. So we recognise that we're in a period of low growth and higher inflation. We recognise we've become a bit more dependent still on financial services. We recognise that the public sector growth can't be the answer to growth. And we're looking at these fundamental issues to see how we can start to address that.
You mentioned the growth of headcount within government, which has increased from 6,000 in 2018 to more than 8,000 full-time equivalents at the end of last year. And in the same context, you mention a curb in the growth of that headcount or full-time equivalent, I guess. Having regard to your responsibilities in the PFM, are you satisfied that a curb in growth will be adequate to balance the books, so to speak?
No.
Would you care to elaborate?
Well, I think as I said before, during this period in question that's happened, we've also exhausted the counter-cyclical fund, we've exhausted the stabilisation fund, and we are in receipt of advice from the fiscal policy panel that we ought to not only try and restore those funds, but also increase the size of the strategic reserve from its current state, which they, I think with some justification, believe is currently too small for the size of the economy we've got. In other words, our rainy day fund could be bigger. So I think that in order to restore fiscal balance in the first instance, and then to restore your reserves, your reserving policy, we will have to go further if we want a meaningful contribution to that to come from reduced public expenditure.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question? So, where would you see the priority for targeting that cost reduction? Or how would you prioritise it?
Well, I think the priority at the moment, certainly with this government, is to try and, first of all, bear down on the rate of growth, which we've been experiencing in recent years, to try and slow that down, is the first priority. I think we need to take a balanced view of it. It's why we're doing the three different pieces of work. If we can be confident that we can grow our way out of the issue, either through financial services or the other sectors of the economy, clearly we've got a huge amount of building and construction activity in the pipeline with the hospital and other things. So we need to form an assessment, a balanced assessment about how much can come from future growth as opposed to cost reduction. But certainly when we get to look at it, there is very little doubt that if you strip the role of the state back to its basics, public safety, health, education, connectivity, the things that people regard as non-discretionary, if you stripped it back to that, that's a much smaller number than the number we have today. We've got a lot of activities that we've added over the years, and probably we'll have to have a discussion about those at some point in the future. And we've had a discussion about some of them today. the estate of arm's length organisations, in many cases, are discretionary activities of government. They're not things that would fall into the category, if you don't do this, you'll have fundamentally failed in your role as a state. So we'll probably have to look at those areas if we can't see a happier path to grow our way out of the current fiscal situation. What is worrying is that the fiscal situation that we find ourselves in, and all governments, is partly a reflection of the geopolitics of the past 10 years, COVID, Brexit, all that stuff. And obviously there was some hope that we might settle down into a more stable period. That hope's been somewhat dashed. And at the moment, as you look ahead, it still looks like we're in the middle of a period of significant geopolitical volatility. That makes it harder for an island economy, to grow its way out of its challenges.
Do you think, Andrew, that we are actually entering into a period of austerity? What's coming? Rationing's coming.
That's hard to say at the moment, because we've still, if you look at the GDP performance we've had, it went down a bit last year, less than was forecast by and by, but it went down a bit. But it was mainly the swing around in banking profitability due to interest rates. So I don't think it's really, we're at that stage yet. But I think it's back to that debate we always have with ourselves. If we want to run a low tax economy, then we have to cut our cloth accordingly. And I think that that's been brought into sharper focus probably in this decade than previous decades.
It's been just over a year since you came here for your our first quarterly public hearing. I wonder what you would say have been your main achievements during this time.
Oh, you'd be better speaking to the respective chief ministers, I think, on that one. If you look at my objectives, I think they've got a relatively small number of themes. One of them is about trying to get a debate and some actions to slow down the rate of growth in public service. And I think we've made some progress in some areas of that. That whole aspect of financial stability. One of them was really about trying to get raise awareness and get a good discourse on some of the bigger strategic issues that are facing the island. I think we've made good progress in that, both within government and more widely through workshops and other things. I think there's a greater awareness now of the demographic situation, of the public finance situation, of the investment situation, and hopefully when we complete the financial services work, the same thing will be true there. I think on the sort of leadership capability side, a thing that both chief ministers were keen to put in the objectives was a response to a feeling that at the point where I arrived, for whatever reason, we'd reached a bit of a low ebb in terms of how the leadership of the public service were feeling about their lot in life. So we've tried to build confidence and capability, particularly through some of the development interventions we've been taking. So I think there's progress there, and a culmination of that will be having a very good approach to succession planning for this role. So I think these are the sorts of areas where we've, between me and the two chief ministers, been trying to make a difference. But I guess it'll be for other people to judge next year.
I'd rather not. I'd rather ask you what you believe just your top achievement from your time in office. What would you say that your top achievement was?
I think it's the mood of public servants. I think we reached a point after COVID, which is completely understandable, where everyone was a bit exhausted, a bit fed up, where the political situation wasn't always as stable as we would like it to be. And I think people were feeling, not feeling as good as we wanted them to be about working for the government of Jersey, and I do think that started to turn around, and there is no real hope of getting a significant improvement on any outcomes for the long haul if we don't have higher engagement levels amongst the people that we're relying on to deliver the services. So whether it be in the schools, whether it be down at the hospital or wherever, I think there's a number of areas where we're turning the corner.
Thank you. Very quickly, in terms of your objectives for the final quarter of this year and looking at next year, I was wondering how you track and measure your progress against these objectives, and how do you communicate this to the public?
So the objectives, Seb thinks I can't remember my objectives, but there should only be 5 on there, so I should be able to remember them. But one of the things that I think should help is that because of the nature and the way in which I arrived in government in a kind of 9-month contract with the previous Chief Minister, she felt understandably that the objectives should be smart enough that they could be delivered, in a 3-month or a 6-month period, i.e. they were outcome focused rather than very rangy. This Chief Minister on arrival reviewed that and decided for similar reasons, given it was a 2-year-ish government, that made sense. So I think when you look at those objectives, most of them are smart, and it's pretty clear what the outcome is in terms of you've done something or you haven't. How they're communicated out to the public, or the best way to communicate them out to the public, I'm less clear about. I mean, I would rather that you're judged on outcomes rather than the communication of outcomes.
Difficult.
Difficult, but hopefully not impossible.
So what would you say your key objectives, your key deliverables are for the next 3 to 6 months?
Certainly to generate options to make these workshops around curbing the growth in the public service, make these workshops as good and interesting as they possibly can be for policy makers. So doing the best job we can to not have arguments about the facts anymore, but really focus on the principles and the options and what people think is the best thing for Jersey. I think that would be very important, albeit I'm not sure how public that would be, but make sure that we do the best possible piece of work on reviewing the competitiveness of the financial services sector for reasons you've mentioned earlier, and whether we like it or not, we've come to depend more on it, not less. So until we get another growth engine, we've really got to very careful husbandry
social value
of that particular growth engine. So I think that will be very, very important. And I guess a final one that I'm very focused on is trying to ensure that we are very thoughtful about CEO succession, and that we have really good discussions with the State's Employment Board about that role, and that we give colleagues in the service who've got the ambition to do that role the best possible chance of competing for it. I think that's very important, because going back to where I started, that colleagues don't always feel that they've had those opportunities and that investment has been there. So I think it's very, very important this time around that colleagues feel that they've had the best possible chance and the best possible support to compete for the role, because I think that will be a very important tone from the top and cultural proof point for the whole organisation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I've just got one technical question.
Okay.
Could I just ask one quite technical question, please? I'm looking at the budget for 26 to 29, and I see that for 27 only, you have some very detailed numbers, 17.431 million for pay management and 11.304 million for future savings. My questions are, one, what are the options that could deliver these savings? And the second one is, if you are not successful for whatever reason in curbing headcount growth, could those savings be wiped out by headcount growth in its place, in their place?
Is this the 2027 number you're looking at? There'll be a number in there for what the assumed payroll cost is based on the inflation assumption, which I think, without seeing it with the first number, it's common in our budgeting process, well, it's certainly been common since I've been in, that almost every year departments, and alongside any growth they've got, are targeted with effectively self-funding some of that growth through savings. So that second number you mentioned will be the savings that are allocated to departments to balance their budget. They will. There's a sort of business as usual process for them to identify how they might achieve that, changes in their service delivery model, whatever it may be. I think this year, or in 2027, I think more so than ever that in part will be informed by the work that we do in these workshops over the winter. Because I think one of the challenges for colleagues in the past is, while they've always had savings targets, we've never really had sufficient clarity on what the political risk appetite is for how to save that money. And I think hopefully one of the things I'm hoping that this process will do is, if we have good workshops, is give greater clarity in what options are more or less palatable for saving money, and that will help the departments with a more structured programme. But as always, if they don't meet those targets, that will be a performance issue for them. But also it will take us back to that position where we'll be leaning on reserves if we can't balance the books.
Would you have extra 10 minutes?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
I'll try to be quick. So while we're on the same topic, just on the optimal public service and the significance of the fact of streamlining and reducing the cost of public service, what do you expect to see the key outcomes you will achieve before the end of your contract in December 26?
So what we're trying to do is slow down the rate in growth, not an absolute reduction, just so everyone's clear. And that's a political mandate. It's because we had 5 years of very significant growth which outstripped the rest of the economy. It's to start to restrain that growth. It is very challenging because we have excluded from that the two biggest drivers of that growth, which are health and education. So it requires some fairly breathless work by the rest of the service. But just to clarify that, in terms of other priorities, I mean, I don't want to preempt the process that I described earlier. Now that we're close to having a fact base, which I think hopefully the entire Assembly in time will agree is the fact base, we then need to agree some principles to look at options for reform. And this is where this might be unusual, say, from the private sector. But I think we've all learned in public service in Jersey that there's no point going down this road without building some kind of reasonable consensus at a political level for what the art of the possible is. So we really want to explore what the art of the possible is, whether it's amalgamation of ALOs or whether it's completely changing the nature of some of the services we offer. We're not there yet. And I think it's important, very important given my tenure, that we actually come up with options which have got consensus, because they're more likely to last beyond any changes in individuals.
Okay, and just leading on to that, like on the overall budget thing, particularly in health, how we are trying, like what practical steps are being taken to have a better grip over the budget? Because we every year see.
Yeah, I mean, those are definitely things that you'll get better answers to from the Treasurer, who was here a few weeks ago, and indeed the lead officer. But within the health service, we've got a range of initiatives underway, some of which, to depending on the data, can make things look worse before they get better. So a very big thing is to try and reduce our dependency on agency hiring, which is a huge expense for us. So it's been trying to get permanent, real focus inside the workforce plan health of permanent recruitment. So that's one of the ways which we hope not only if we recruit but we settle the people in will save us. There's a lot of work being done in commissioning. We've been fighting hard in the UK to ensure that the costs for tertiary care are in line with the master agreements we've got with the NHS. As you can imagine, hospitals across the UK are all in, I wouldn't say precarious fiscal position. They're in a, whatever's worse than precarious, they're in a dreadful fiscal position, and they obviously are trying to pass costs on to everyone.
Yeah.
So we've got a lot of work to try and reduce the impact of that on us. So a whole series of micro initiatives, and health, like other areas, have got specific savings plans. Even in the context of an overall budget which is increasing, they've got areas within that we're looking for them to reduce their spend to self-fund some of their savings.
Okay. Just curiously, are they or any of the departments looking to use technology to reduce admin costs?
They're always doing that. Of course, a big part of the current technology strategy is to recognise the need to sweat the technology that we've already invested a lot of money in, whether that's by using it better or pulling new modules down from SAP or wherever. So yes, they're looking at that in respect to AI in the narrow. We've got a group, a cross-government group on AI, which is pursuing use cases, pulling together the best business plans that we can find where it can be deployed, mainly for the activity you've just described, to reduce costs. So yeah, that's part of each AO pursuing their particular savings.
Okay. Just because I'm a bit closer to this thing, have we had a discussion with Digital Jersey on this one? Because just looking at health, giving you an example, sitting with a
I mean,
consultant.
you're close to AI, you're
Yeah.
close to Digital
Yeah.
Jersey.
Sorry, AI in prospect of the overall picture, like a workshop where they can suggest certain areas of improvement in the processes and everything.
Yes, but I mean, we speak to a lot of people. I think it's important to understand that a lot of the AI that we will consume will come through platforms we've already invested in.
Yeah.
So we're doing lots of work with those suppliers, key suppliers, and what's available to us and what we can pull down, what can be used. There's been dialogue between the team and Digital Jersey. But yeah, we're obviously focused primarily in the first instance on the government's need. We're very well aware from discussions with industry in Jersey that the big banks and others have all got AI strategies related to their business models. So there's a continuous dialogue.
If you're asking about very quickly, we have a Copilot in our Microsoft, and we cannot use Copilot, or officers cannot use Copilot because we don't have proper business account. So I know have the business case been presented once we're developing all these strategies.
Yep.
We do have already something in the system, and we not we as a politicians and not our officers are allowed to, your officers allowed to use it because we don't have a commercial account.
Just leading on that one, like you mentioned,
I want to understand, have you been presented with the business case how much extra would cost that the officers will be able to use secure Copilot?
We've certainly, as part of the technology strategy, looked at that. Obviously, we've got some people who are using it already, and we're balancing that off in the strategy with a number of other things. But I can either write you on it, or you can have Jason in and he'll explain it to you in detail.
Yeah, so go to the use. Can we go back to the, we have a couple more questions and we can finish about the budgets and we finish with this.
Exactly. On the overall the expenditure, we have noted the proposed expenditure is like 5% less what we've spent in 2025. How do you think we can deliver this reduction in the costs?
I'm really sorry, I'm not. What's everyone referring to? Have we moved on to budget proper? I thought I was dealing with that on Friday, but what are we?
So
talking
this is
about
just
here?
like the proposed expenditure budget, which I think we picked it up from. But I've got 2024 numbers, 2025, and then proposed 2026 expenditure budget number, which is like 5% lower than 2025 number.
I think that because maybe to clarify, so we did have deficit in 2024, we did have a deficit in 2023, we are headed into the deficit in 2025. And the question basically was, as a principal accountable officer, have you received any letters of instruction for 2024 spending? And maybe the other question, maybe if you need to choose the question, we've seen that it has been a request to pay 50 million less into the Social Security Fund. And the question, would it be deficit if we would make this payment to the Social Security Fund? For 2025.
Yeah.
So basically, retrospectively now been asked to pay 50 million less into the Social Security Fund. And if we would do this payment, would we find ourselves
Yeah, so not
balance?
paying less than you intended into the fund is effectively saving less, if that makes sense.
Yes. And we talk about we have exhausted of stabilization fund, we exhausted strategic fund, and now we're exhausting
during
social
COVID and it's after. Well, those are quite different. I mean, again, these funds are set up for very specific things, but during COVID and its aftermath, we correctly used the stabilisation fund and the counter-cyclical fund to get us through that. That's what those funds are for, to get us through that monumental event. What the FPP are saying is you could probably need to start restoring those funds, because unfortunately for you and all of us, the next 10 years at the moment looks as volatile as the last 10
question
years.
is different. I think that I didn't explain. Apology if I didn't
But
explain
on
my
the Social
question.
Security Fund, obviously, what you're doing there is you're saving less into that fund.
Absolutely. But my question.
And by saving less into that fund, you create capacity for some of the growth in the future budget, which
I'm
has
talking
been
about
outlined.
2025. In 2025, retrospectively,
Yeah.
has been requested from the states that we will pay 50 million less into the fund.
Yes.
My question, what would be the deficit if you would continue to make the grant to the Social Security Fund from the consolidated fund as it was agreed for 2025? What is prediction for 2025 deficit? And from on the consolidated fund that you need
I'll
this
need to
50
get back
million.
to you on it. I didn't realise we were dealing with the budget today.
No, it's not the budget, it's for 2025, it's spending current year, we are not looking into the future years. We are spending what is a predicted deficit for 2025 and and how much it's related to health. What a prediction that you have to 2025.
What's the prediction for health for 2025?
What is prediction of the deficit for 2025 currently?
I need to get back to you on it.
Back. Okay, no problem. No, it's fine if you don't.
Yeah. I don't want to give you spurious numbers.
No worries. And when was the decision been made to retrospectively requesting extra 15 million for the already approved budget for 2025? Do you remember what is based on? Why it was requested to withhold 50 and not 30 million for 2025 and not 70 million. I mean, it was some numbers probably. But if you're not sure, we are followed
sure.
up with the writing, no problem, apology.
Yeah. It's something we can definitely deal
Yeah.
with at CSSP on Friday, which is on the budget, so I will
Okay.
address it for them.
Absolutely. Is it any more quick questions?
Yeah, it's just like one last question. Have you tracked whether growth has been constrained between Q1 and Q3 of 2025? And if you can give us some examples there.
Growth in
Overall growth.
Spending.
total cash spending growth.
Yeah.
If it's been constrained between Q1 and Q3, again, I'll just clarify for you. Obviously, I track the headcount and track the consulting spend, but the overall growth, I'll
Okay,
come
we'll
back
follow
and
up.
clarify for you.
We'll follow up. Deputy Wilson, will you have any questions?
One last one,
Yes.
please. Brief one. The pay settlement awards are measured by reference to RPI over here, which is more or less unique. The UK ceased using the RPI in favour of the CPI 15, 20 years ago, I believe it was. I know of no other country that uses RPI versus CPI. Could you let me know whether you believe that RPI is the better measure compared with CPI for Jersey's purposes, and if so, why?
Well, I haven't thought about this recently. RPI obviously has housing costs within it. But yeah, I mean, I'll check with the chief economist. I mean, I think the UK, for affordability reasons, first of all, moved from the pensions linked to average earnings under Mrs Thatcher to RPI, and then from RPI to CPI. From memory under Gordon Brown. So those were those measures to constrain the rate of growth in that liability for government. But in the Jersey's case, I don't know the history of why they've always stuck with RPI. But I would just note that many things in Jersey are RPI linked, not just that.
Just like to know whether you believe it's the correct measure, please.
Well, that's that needs some thought.
We'll follow up, thank you. No, thank you very much. Thank
You're
you for
welcome.
extra time. Really, really appreciate. I'm looking at the Seb, who is responsible just for noting the executive response for CNAG report on financial management is 1 month's delay. I know that you requested extension for 2 weeks, and we gave extension. We are really usually very large with extensions, but it's after extensions delay for 2 weeks. Are there any specific reasons, and how can we avoid this in the future?
I think the nature of this response and review in comparison to probably all the ones that I've seen in the last few years, there are a number of different stakeholders involved, and we just need to make sure that all of them are completely aligned in the response before we get that back to you.
Because it is 1 month's delay, it's after 6 weeks that already should respond, I think it's big. And we are looking forward to receive our annual report and accounts executive response. I know it will be delayed, but not much, I assume.
Yep.
And the infrastructure resilience one will be delayed, but not much, hopefully.
Should have. I would hope to have at least the annual report and the infrastructure with you by Friday or Monday, and the financial management as soon as reasonably possible.
When do you think it will be possible? Because that was really 1 month's delay after 6 weeks original.
I think without speaking to the treasurer, I wouldn't be able to give you a